Hello, my name is Monica and I'm a mental health support worker for On Track Community Programs based at On Track House in South Tweed. I have lived with mental illness, specifically borderline personality disorder, for more than 30 years. I guess the first outward signs that something was not quite right started when I was 16 and I started to self-harm by cutting myself. I spent 3 months unable to face going to school, just months before I sat for the HSC. And with this being such a difficult time for any teenager, I guess it was dismissed as such. At that time, there was not much awareness about mental illness, and it was something that was not really talked about. So I did my best to fit in and be normal in a world where I just felt like I didn't belong. I became very good at wearing a mask in order to be accepted, but it was a facade that I could never maintain for long before things would fall apart again. It wasn't long before my sense of failure and my increasing emotional sensitivity led me to attempt to take my life over and over again. And with each attempt, I felt more and more disconnected from the world as I had to hide more and more aspects of myself, mainly as a result of the shame that I felt. I was fortunate to find a psychiatrist when in my early 30s who also lived with mental illness, and for the first time in my life, I think it was, I began to feel that I wasn't really alone. By that time though, I had developed an addiction to heroin and the cutting had become more severe and more frequent, and so I was hospitalised. This seemed to make all the shame and the pain I felt so much worse that I left hospital on a mission to leave Sydney and basically self-destruct. Because after being hospitalised, it was really hard feeling like I could fit in back into society. And so after a period of homelessness, my journey led me here to Tweed Heads, a place where I would finally begin the healing process. I spent 12 years as a virtual recluse whilst discovering an awakening spirituality that opened the door to the self-awareness that ultimately changed my life. 3 years ago, I became a participant in the Lived Experience Project, a government-funded project whose objective was to train and support people living with mental health issues to become peer support workers in the mental health sector. As a result, here I am today working for On Track and based at On Track House in South Tweed, where I work with people who are experiencing mental ill health in a residential rehabilitation setting. And I'm living a life that is filled with purpose. It has been an incredible journey where I have overcome challenges that have propelled me forward with every step and have enabled me to achieve things that I did not think were possible for me. One of my biggest achievements occurred in September of last year when I attained my driver's licence after 30 years of avoiding it due to an incapacitating fear and anxiety. And that same week I was also awarded the North Coast and State Phil Darby Memorial Award, which is awarded by State Training Services to a student who has made significant changes to their life and career through vocational education and training. Every one of these achievements and the challenges I have overcome have impacted greatly on my life. I have finally realised what I'm truly capable of, and I'm excited about a future that at one point in my life looked very bleak to me, but not anymore. Through all this, I have come to realise that the only limitations that exist in my life are the ones that I create for myself. And to be honest, I wouldn't change a single thing about the life I have lived because it has made me the person that I am today. So I guess when I share my story, one of the first questions that I'm usually asked is, what was the turning point for you and what was the key moment? And that's, as much as I've thought about it, it's a really difficult thing to define because as I look back, there were so many key moments and so many turning points, and each step forward that I made seemed to propel me forward to the next achievement, so to speak, in my recovery. But I guess the precursor to all this was my telling myself that I was sick of my life being the way it was. I felt stuck in my life, I was unhappy, and I knew that I wanted to move forward. I wanted things to be different, but I guess at the time I didn't know how. As mentioned earlier, I was really fortunate to have a psychiatrist treat me early on who also lived with mental illness. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and a lot of our sessions where I struggled with coming to terms with feeling different to the rest of the world, he used to put it all into perspective for me by sharing what he had been through. And I guess hearing his stories about what he had been through and seeing his life as it had turned out. I mean, he was a successful and very prominent psychiatrist in Sydney. That gave me hope, and it helped me to see that as unhappy as I was in my life, it didn't have to stay that way, that things could change and that recovery was indeed a definite possibility. I also was really lucky in having a lot of people around me who offered me the support that would ultimately get me to the place where I am now. And one of them was the case manager who worked for Community Mental Health in Tweed. It was a difficult relationship initially because he was not a soft, gentle person, and I had been used to, up until that point, being treated by people who I guess felt sorry for my circumstances, and he wasn't like that at all. And it was really difficult for me to see the benefit in that. But years later, I was able to see that tough love that he gave me actually made me reflect upon so many aspects of myself that it kind of, I guess in essence what it did was it let me let go of the victim, and the victim was what had held me back so much in life, the feeling sorry for myself for the way my life was, wondering why me, why is this happening to me, and that those thought processes aren't helpful. They kept me from moving forward because while I continued to see myself as a victim, I'd continue to behave and act as a victim. And so even though at the time my case manager's approach, I didn't think it benefited me, about a year later when I look back upon the way he treated me and the way he spoke to me, I saw the truth in what he was saying when I would go on about other people's behaviours and how they were impacting on me. He taught me to let them go and not worry about what other people did, not worry about the things that I couldn't control, but brought it back to me and kept saying to me, okay, don't worry about them, so what are you going to do about this? And that was a huge step forward because suddenly I guess I was able to take responsibility. I saw that even though I had no control over what others did, I was in complete control of how I responded to a particular situation. I also read a lot of spiritual books, and they were really helpful in awakening that sense of self-awareness, which was so vital to my own recovery. I had to learn to become an observer in my life, and I guess what precipitated that was the fact that I noticed that a lot of the issues in my life weren't actually real, as in they weren't actually happening. A lot of the situations that were causing me distress and which were prompting my behaviours, like it's the self-harm and the drug abuse, had a lot to do with my thought process. I realised that what I was seeing before me was not necessarily what was being transferred back to my brain and my mind, and I wasn't interpreting things as they were, but according to my own conditioning and my own beliefs. And so I had to learn to become a witness or an observer and take an impartial view when I was interacting with people, where I would listen to what they were saying and then observe my own reactions. And if I saw that my reactions weren't aligned with what they were actually saying to me, I would work on changing my reactions or getting to the bottom of why it was that I was reacting to a situation in the way that I was. It wasn't easy because it takes a lot of work to be completely vigilant when it comes to your thoughts, but it was, for me, it was a way forward. I had tried medications, and I have used medications when I've been really unwell, but it's something that was decided by my treatment team that it was not a solution long term. Because my issues were seen as mainly behavioural, I had a lot of work to do on myself, I guess, and changing my thoughts was a major part of that. By doing this, I was able to let go of parts of myself that I realised no longer served me. And up until that point, I had thought were me. So it was a really difficult and really painful process to have to go through. But it has completely changed my life. And I guess I kept journals during the times when I was unwell. And when I go back to them now and read them, I often remark about the fact that it seems like a different person that I'm reading about, and it was a different person writing them, and I couldn't understand why. And now when I realise how many different aspects of myself I've had to let go, and how I've had to completely restructure the way I confront life and the way I think about things, I realise that I'm right, that it was a completely different person to the person that I am now. And that person then, I don't think, would have been able to achieve what I've achieved now. One of the things my psychologist always said to me during my therapy was to always remain curious about myself. Don't take things for granted. Don't think this is an end point for you, but just always remain curious to the possibilities. Always be observant. And I really took that on board, and I guess maintaining that attitude of always being a student within my own life has really helped me move forward. Another thing that was really important for me in my recovery was I had to really stop identifying with my diagnosis. I'd originally been diagnosed in my early 20s with unipolar depression, but it was a diagnosis that was changed in my early 40s. When it was decided that depression was secondary to borderline personality disorder. And so I remember hearing about this and going home and getting on the internet and grabbing my psychology textbooks and looking up borderline personality disorder, and I was able to identify with so many of the characteristics that I read there, and so many things about the way that I was suddenly made sense. But it was detrimental at the same time, because reading those characteristics, I noticed that there was a change within me. Whereas I had felt hopeful as I read all this, I felt like I was doomed, like this is how I'm destined to live out the rest of my life, showing these behaviours and not being able to do anything about it, until someone very dear to me realised what I was doing and said to me, you know, it's up to you what you do with this. You don't have to define yourself by your diagnosis. You can see it as a part of you, but it doesn't define who you are, and you can change this. And they were words, it took me a while to process, but I finally saw the logic in that, and I was able to pull myself out of the pit that I could feel myself sinking into. I guess so that knowing about these characteristics that are indicative of borderline personality disorder really helped me to understand myself and forgive myself a little for my behaviours in the past. I guess how people responded to me made a big difference to my sense of self-worth, and ultimately helped me to see that I did deserve better. I'll never forget calling Centrelink when I was homeless, and a lady from the call centre that took the call apologised to me for becoming personal in the phone call. But she went on to speak to me as a mother would, and expressed her concerns and urged me to please do something about my accommodation situation. And it really took me aback, because even though I had no clashes with staff at Centrelink, and I've always been treated with the utmost respect and support, I had heard from people around me just how ruthless they could be to people who are on disability pensions, But it's something that stayed with me. This was about 12, 13 years ago, and I've never forgotten that lady's voice. I just wish I'd taken her name, because I would really like to send her a letter and let her know that what she did and the words she said to me really made a difference in my life. Because about 2 weeks after that, I'd found a house in Murwillumbah and I had permanent accommodation. So also the staff at Caritas Hospital, the mental health unit where I was hospitalised in Sydney, even though I was a patient, again, you know, I remember going in there and the first thing they said to me was, "It's okay, you can finally take off the mask," which showed a lot of insight on their part, because they, and I guess they work with this every day, so they could see that I was struggling being there. But I remember that as I left, when I was discharged from the unit, one of the staff members approached me and said if I'd ever considered working in mental health, that there would be a job there for me. And I mean, I was really touched by that, because as I've said before, being hospitalised, it was the first time I was hospitalised. It was a real shock, and there was so much shame tied to that, and a sense of loss of identity. And for someone to see something worthwhile in me, such as the staff did, it really made a huge difference to my recovery. Also, On-Track Disability Employment Service staff, they were amazing in that they saw potential where I saw none, and they were the ones that suggested that I go for a job with On-Track, which took me 3 weeks of absolute sheer anxiety, I think, before I actually answered and said yes. But had they not planted that seed in my mind, I don't think I would have taken the steps on my own. Another vital ingredient to my recovery has been my family. Without my family's support, I mean, there were times where they did have to draw the line because my behaviours were unacceptable, and I do see that now, and I can understand why, but having that family support, that constant throughout the whole journey, has been crucial to my sense of well-being, to my sense of recovery. And everything that I've achieved to this point is not just for me, I've also done it for them, and I know that every part of my journey has impacted on them greatly. I also found that pets, animals, were a very important part of my recovery. They helped me move out of my despair and move into action. They gave me a reason to get up every morning when I didn't have one. And a lot of the animals that entered my life were rescue animals. And so I knew that without me looking after them, they could not fend for themselves. So having someone to look after made a huge difference. It gave me, helping these injured animals gave me a sense of purpose and this feeling like I was doing something worthwhile with my life, because it was so hard for me. I really struggled with social situations where people would ask me what I did, and to have to say I was on a disability pension, that brought me a lot of shame. And so I guess that could have had a lot to do with why I withdrew socially, other than my own anxieties, but it was a hard thing to have to explain to people, especially because externally I looked like there was nothing wrong with me. And so while this was going on and I was helping injured animals, mainly birds and reptiles, I found that I was walking around with my head held high again, whereas I used to walk around and stare at the ground, not make eye contact with anyone. But suddenly I felt proud about what I was doing. I guess I'd felt like a taker all these years, being on the disability pension, and it finally felt like I was giving something back. Also, animals are great teachers. With my personal pets, which I don't like to call pets, I call them my family, but they were like mirrors to me. they reflected a lot of my own behaviours back at me, especially my cat, who really made me look at how I was walking through this world and what I was putting out there, because I noticed that when I was agitated or when I was anxious, he would cower from me, even though I never abused an animal or I've never hit him. But there was that fear that was present when I was agitated and when I was unwell. And so it really helped me, he really helped me to take a look at myself and look at how I walk, how I present myself to people, how I speak, even my thoughts, because I was aware that when I was thinking negative thoughts, even then he would respond to me in a negative way. So I found, to be honest, that animals were some of the greatest teachers that I've had in my recovery journey so far. Work has been a powerful healer. I guess I wanted to work, but there was always that fear of how I would explain the last 12 years to a prospective employer and how that would make me feel. And I've never been someone who had a lot of confidence in myself to put myself out there and take risks. But since starting to work with OnTrack, I've moved forward in leaps and bounds. I've been placed in situations which terrified me, like public speaking, but I've been able to overcome. And each time I overcome something which has previously brought me undone, it just makes me stronger and more determined to keep moving forward, no matter what it is that I have to face, no matter how challenging or how frightening it may be. And it's also that sense of belonging that comes from working, the feeling part of a team. I was so fortunate in that I was never, I was accepted from the start. People didn't see me as someone with a mental illness. They didn't see me as my diagnosis, but they accepted me as a valued member of the team. And what that has meant for my recovery, I really cannot put into words, because after feeling like an outcast for so long, to be a part of something greater than oneself, there's nothing that can describe how wonderful and how healing that is. So thank you to everyone who has been a part of this, because everyone has impacted on my recovery and made it possible. I guess one of the most important things was for me to learn to see that my mental illness wasn't static, but that it was fluctuating. There were good days and there were bad days, but it was completely within my control. And the most important thing is that what works for me may not necessarily work for somebody else. But I guess more than anything, what I'm here to show and to teach people is that recovery is definitely possible. For a long time, those words weren't really uttered, and I guess when I was originally diagnosed, it was not something that was said. It was like a life sentence. Another thing that I've learned along the way is when I thought of recovery, I kept seeing it as like a final destination, final stop on my journey, and it's not that way at all. Recovery is not an end point, it's an ongoing journey. And you know, my life is not symptom free, but that's okay, because that's not what recovery is. Recovery is about living a worthwhile life whilst managing the symptoms of mental illness. And what my story is a message of hope. Hope that recovery is possible, because my life is proof